In an age forged by blood and chaos, a new order would rise from the ashes of a fallen empire. This is the story of Britain's brutal transformation, where warlords clashed, kingdoms crumbled, and heroes emerged from the shadows. From the last remnants of Roman rule to the unstoppable force of Viking invasions, the land was forever scarred by centuries of conflict and survival. As the legions of Rome retreated in 410 AD, they left behind a fractured, vulnerable province, an island abandoned to its fate. What followed was a relentless struggle, a saga of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms fighting for dominance in a world consumed by chaos. The peaceful order of Roman Britain was gone, replaced by a maelstrom of war, betrayal, and survival. In this episode, we unravel the epic tale of how these Germanic invaders, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, rose to power, shaping the destiny of an entire island. From the desperate cries of the Britons to the war drums of Viking raiders, the land was torn apart. Yet amid the destruction, a figure looms on the horizon, a man destined to unite a broken people and face the greatest threat of them all. Alfred the Great's rise is imminent, but before he can step into history, we must first journey through the blood-soaked centuries that preceded him. This is not just the story of kingdoms and kings. It's the story of a people fighting for survival, of warriors and rulers striving to claim their place in a changing world. This is the Anglo-Saxon Saga. As we saw in our previous video about the King Alaric and Visigoths, the Western Roman Empire was in a state of severe decline in the early 5th century. Pressured by invasions from multiple fronts and internal political chaos, the empire could no longer defend its distant provinces. In 410 AD, in that exact year, Visigoths under King Alaric sacked Rome. The Roman Emperor Honorius made a decision that would forever change the fate of Britain. He sent a letter to the Romano-British cities, instructing them to look to their own defences, effectively signalling the withdrawal of Roman military presence from the island. This letter, often referred to as the Rescript of Honorius, was a response to the dire situation in Britain, which had been left vulnerable due to the withdrawal of Roman military forces. For nearly 4 centuries, Britain had been a part of the Roman Empire, benefiting from its advanced infrastructure, military protection, and administrative organization. The Hadrian's Wall, built in 122 AD, had once protected the northern frontier from Pictish tribes, while towns like Londinium, modern London, and Eboracum, modern York, had flourished as Roman provincial capitals. But as the legions departed in the early 5th century, Britain was left defenceless, vulnerable to raids and internal fragmentation. The Romano-British elites, who had long relied on Roman support, now found themselves struggling to maintain order. Without the logistical and military backbone of Rome, local rulers attempted to assert authority, but their power was often fragmented and contested. Magnus Maximus, a Roman general who had previously ruled parts of Britain, had already stripped the island of a substantial portion of its troops in 383 AD, when he led a campaign to the continent. This depletion of forces only worsened the situation as the 5th century progressed. By 411 AD, the effects of the Roman withdrawal were painfully evident. Pictish tribes from the north, Scotty raiders from Ireland, and the Saxons from across the North Sea began to intensify their attacks on Britain's coasts and settlements. The remaining Britons, many of whom were descendants of Romanized citizens, found it increasingly difficult to fend off these incursions. Towns and villas that had once been symbols of Roman prosperity were abandoned or fell into disrepair. Adding to the turmoil, the Saxons, Germanic warriors from present-day northern Germany and southern Denmark, saw Britain as ripe for settlement. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, a historical record compiled centuries later, hints at this growing presence, noting the increasing raids by Saxon pirates and the inability of the native Britons to defend themselves against the new wave of invaders. In an effort to secure some form of defence, local rulers like Vortigern, a British king, made a decision that would have long-lasting consequences. Vortigern is believed to have come to power around 425 AD, capitalizing on this instability. Around 449 AD, Vortigern invited the Saxons to Britain, hoping they would act as mercenaries and protect his kingdom from the Picts and Scots. Hengist and Horsa, leaders of the Jutes, also arrived with their forces. The Saxons initially helped drive back the invaders, but soon became dissatisfied with their treatment and began to turn against Vortigern. Their growing power led to conflicts that ultimately resulted in Vortigern losing control over his kingdom. According to some sources, Vortigern married Rowena, the daughter of Hengist, in an attempt to solidify his alliance with the Saxons. This union is often portrayed as both a political maneuver and a source of tension. Following his marriage alliance, tensions escalated between Vortigern's forces and the Saxons. Notably, his son Vortimer fought valiantly against them but was ultimately killed in battle. This defeat marked a significant turning point in Vortigern's reign. By 457 AD, Vortigern faced a decisive defeat at Crayford against Saxon forces. Following this loss, he fled to North Wales, effectively ending his rule and marking a shift in power towards the Anglo-Saxons, who began to occupy more territory in Britain. Vortigern is often portrayed negatively in historical texts. He is seen as a foolish king whose decisions allowed for the permanent settlement of Saxons in Britain, leading to centuries of conflict and cultural change. His story has been embellished through legends and medieval literature, contributing to the narrative of British history during this era. He is frequently mentioned in works like Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain, which further romanticized his life and reign. Vortigern remains a controversial figure in British history, viewed as both a desperate ruler trying to protect his people and as one whose actions inadvertently facilitated the decline of native British power in favor of incoming Saxon settlers. His legacy serves as a cautionary tale about alliances and leadership during times of crisis. By the mid-5th century, the once unified Roman province of Britannia had fractured into small competing kingdoms. The Roman roads, which had once been the arteries of trade and communication, now connected fragmented, isolated communities. Towns that had thrived under Roman rule fell into disrepair or were abandoned entirely. The surviving Romano-British population, increasingly isolated, clung to their Roman identity and traditions, but their hold on power was slipping away. The Saxons, along with other Germanic tribes like the Angles and Jutes, were laying the foundation for what would become the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. By the mid-6th century, Britain was a mosaic of emerging Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, each built on the ashes of Roman Britain. The Saxons had claimed much of the southern territory, while the Angles and Jutes established footholds in the east and north. These groups gradually displaced or assimilated the Romano-British population, who struggled to maintain their culture and identity in the face of relentless expansion. The Kingdom of Kent, founded by the Jutes in the mid-5th century, was among the first major Anglo-Saxon polities to emerge. The kingdom's founding is traditionally linked to the arrival of Hengist and Horsa, two Jutish brothers invited by Vortigern to help defend his lands against the Picts. Initially mercenaries, they soon turned their attention to establishing their own rule in southeastern Britain. Under King Ethelbert, Kent became a powerful and influential kingdom. Ethelbert, King of Kent between 560 and 616, was a pivotal figure in Anglo-Saxon history for several reasons. He was the first Anglo-Saxon king to convert to Christianity. Following the arrival of St. Augustine in 597 AD, sent by Pope Gregory the Great to bring the new faith to the Germanic peoples of Britain. Ethelbert's conversion and his support for the new religion helped spread Christianity across the Anglo-Saxon world. Kent also benefited from its proximity to Frankish Gaul, establishing close diplomatic and trade relations, which in turn increased its wealth and cultural influence. Ethelbert is also credited with issuing the first known code of Anglo-Saxon laws, known as the Law of Ethelbert. This legal code established regulations governing both secular and ecclesiastical matters and laid down protections for the clergy, reflecting influences from continental legal traditions. The code is significant as it represents one of the earliest examples of written law in England. Ethelbert's reign set precedents for kingship that influenced subsequent rulers in England. His model of governance integrated Christian values with royal authority, shaping the concept of kingship in Anglo-Saxon England. According to Bede, Ethelbert held the title of Bretwalda, meaning he was a high king who wielded influence over other kingdoms south of the River Humber. This status allowed him to exert control and foster alliances among various Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Ethelbert's reign set precedents for kingship that influenced subsequent rulers in England. His model of governance integrated Christian values with royal authority, shaping the concept of kingship in Anglo-Saxon England. Kent's prominence during this period was not only political, but also economic. Canterbury, Kent's capital, became a centre of religious and intellectual life, with monasteries and churches rapidly being established following Augustine's mission. Kent is home to Canterbury Cathedral, England's oldest cathedral, and a centre for Christianity since Ethelbert's conversion. Rochester Cathedral is also significant as the second oldest cathedral in England. Unique to Kent is Gavelkind inheritance. This inheritance system allowed equal division of land among sons, contrasting with primogeniture practiced elsewhere in England. The same inheritance system was also used in Frankish Gaul, which at the end led to the end of Great Frankish Empire in 843 after the Verdun Treaty. To the north, the Kingdom of Northumbria began to rise as a dominant force. Northumbria was born from the unification of two earlier kingdoms, Bernicia in the north and Deira in the south. Bernicia was located in what is now southern Scotland and Northumberland and established around 547 AD by Ida, king of the Angles, who is often referred to as Ida the Flame-Bearer. He founded a royal seat at Bamberg, which became a significant centre for the Bernician kings. Deira, located to the south, was another early kingdom with its capital likely at York. The two kingdoms frequently engaged in conflict due to their rivalry, which was rooted in their distinct royal lineages and territorial claims. In 604 AD, Ethelfrith of Bernicia united the two territories through conquest, thus founding the powerful kingdom of Northumbria. Ethelfrith ruled from 593 to 616 AD. He was known for his aggressive campaigns against both the Britons and rival Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. His leadership expanded Northumbrian territory, and by the time of his death in 616 AD, Northumbria was one of the most powerful kingdoms in Britain. However, it was under King Edwin, r. 1616 to 633 AD, that Northumbria reached its early peak. Edwin not only extended Northumbrian control over vast territories, but he also converted to Christianity in 627 AD, greatly enhancing the kingdom's prestige and influence. Northumbria became a leading centre of Christian learning and culture, with monasteries like Lindisfarne and Jarrow producing important works of religious and historical scholarship. The stability of Northumbria began to wane with the arrival of Viking forces in the late 8th century. The Great Heathen Army captured York in 866 AD, leading to significant Norse settlement and influence over the region. By the mid-10th century, following a series of conflicts and changes in power dynamics, Northumbria ceased to exist as an independent kingdom after being absorbed into the Kingdom of England around 954 AD. The next kingdom we'll explore is East Anglia, located in the eastern part of England. Established by the Angles in the late 5th century, this kingdom encompassed areas now known as Norfolk, Suffolk, and parts of Cambridgeshire. East Anglia emerged as a key power in the early 7th century under King Redwald, who ruled from 599 to 624. He was a ruler from the Wulfingus dynasty. Redwald is notable for his mixed religious practices, maintaining both pagan and Christian traditions. Around 616 AD, after a major victory against Northumbria, he was recognized as a Bretwalda, an overlord of several Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Redwald is also linked to the famous Sutton Hoo ship burial discovered in 1939. The burial site, filled with treasures, a ship, and elaborately crafted weapons, reflects the wealth and influence of East Anglia during his reign. Politically, Redwald played a significant role in supporting Edwin of Northumbria, helping him regain his throne after years in exile. Despite being smaller than Northumbria, East Anglia was a significant player in the intricate alliance networks that characterized early Anglo-Saxon politics. However, the kingdom faced external threats, particularly from Mercia. In 794 AD, King Ethelbert II was executed on the orders of Offa of Mercia, leading to a period where East Anglia lost its independence. A major turning point came in 865 AD with the arrival of the Danish Great Heathen Army. After defeating East Anglia, they killed King Edmund the Martyr in 869 AD, effectively absorbing the kingdom into the Danelaw, the area under Danish control. Throughout its existence, East Anglia was an important centre for trade and culture. Its fertile land supported agriculture, especially in wool and textiles, making it one of the wealthiest regions in England before industrialisation shifted economic focus. Culturally, it contributed to early medieval literature and monastic scholarship. The Kingdom of East Anglia played a pivotal role in early English history through its political power, cultural achievements, and interactions with neighbouring states. Its legacy still shapes the identity and historical narrative of modern East Anglia. To the west, the Kingdom of Mercia emerged in the mid-6th century, founded by Angles who settled in what is now central England. Unlike the coastal kingdoms of Kent and East Anglia, Mercia's position in the heart of Britain allowed it to expand aggressively. Early Mercian rulers such as King Penda R. 626 to 655 AD were notable for their military campaigns and their determination to resist Christianization. Penda, who remained a staunch pagan, waged wars against his Christian neighbours, most notably Northumbria and Wessex. Penda's death in 655 AD at the Battle of Winwade marked a turning point for Mercia. Afterward, Mercia gradually embraced Christianity, but its political ambitions remained fierce. After Penda's reign, his son Wulfhere restored Mercian independence from Northumbrian rule and further extended the kingdom's influence. He successfully captured territories in Kent and established London as an important Mercian centre. Wulfhere's brother, Ethelred, strengthened Mercia's position by recovering previously lost lands and asserting control over other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, ensuring Mercia remained a dominant force in the region. King Ethelbald ruled from 716 to 757 during what is often called the Golden Age of Mercia. Under his leadership, the kingdom achieved its peak, with Bede recording that by 731 AD, all southern provinces were under his authority. Ethelbald's reign was marked by considerable territorial growth and the strengthening of political power, including forming alliances through strategic marriages. By the 8th century, under the rule of King Offa, R757 to 796 AD, Mercia reached its zenith. Offa's reign is best remembered for the construction of Offa's Dyke, a massive earthwork along the border between Mercia and Wales, symbolising both Mercia's military strength and its rivalry with neighbouring Welsh kingdoms. Offa also established diplomatic ties with Charlemagne, the king of the Franks, which further enhanced Mercia's influence beyond the island. At its height, Mercia controlled much of southern and central England, rivaling both Northumbria and Wessex for dominance. Following Offa's death, Mercia's power began to wane, especially with the rise of Ecgbert, king of Wessex. In 825 AD, Ecgbert dealt a critical blow to Mercia by defeating Beornwulf at the Battle of Ellendun, resulting in the loss of key territories such as Kent and Sussex. This defeat marked a pivotal shift in the balance of power within England. The late 9th century brought additional challenges as Danish invasions destabilised Mercia. By 877, the kingdom was divided between English and Danish-controlled lands, leading to a steady erosion of Mercia's political independence. Despite efforts to recover, including Wiglaf's brief restoration in 830 AD, Mercia never fully regained its former strength. Mercia's ascent to power was defined by effective leadership, successful military campaigns, and shrewd political strategies, enabling it to control much of southern England at its height. However, internal conflicts, pressure from competing kingdoms such as Wessex, and foreign invasions eventually contributed to its downfall, signalling a major turning point in early medieval English history. The Kingdom of Wessex, also known as the Kingdom of the West Saxons, was a significant Anglo-Saxon kingdom in southern England. Wessex is traditionally thought to have been founded by Cerdic, who arrived in Hampshire around 495 AD. He was succeeded by his son or grandson, Cynric, and together they laid the foundation for the kingdom's early strength. Cerdic, often regarded as the first king of Wessex, is believed to have ruled from around 519 to 540 AD. The kingdom grew substantially under King Saulin, reigned 560 to 592 AD, who secured victories over nearby tribes such as the Jutes and Britons. His rule signalled the rise of Wessex as a dominant force in southern England. Wessex would eventually become the most important Anglo-Saxon kingdom, but its rise was gradual. During the 6th and 7th centuries, Wessex was one of several regional powers, often overshadowed by Mercia and Northumbria. Its rulers, such as King Cynegils, 611 to 643 AD, worked to consolidate Wessex's territories, and Cynegils was the first West Saxon king to embrace Christianity, converting in 635 AD with the help of Bishop Birinus. Throughout the 7th and 8th centuries, Wessex engaged in numerous conflicts with its neighbours, particularly Mercia, which sought to expand its control over southern Britain. Despite these challenges, Wessex's geographic position, shielded by natural barriers like the River Thames, allowed it to remain relatively secure from northern aggression. Over time, Wessex would become a stronghold against external threats, especially the Vikings in the later 9th century under Alfred the Great, about whom we will speak extensively in our next video. Alfred introduced major military reforms, created a system of fortified towns, burhs, and championed education and literacy, including the development of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. His initiatives laid the foundation for a more unified England. Alfred's grandson, Athelstan, extended Wessex's influence even further, and in 927 AD he became the first king of England after defeating rival kingdoms and recovering lands from Viking rule. His reign represented the peak of Wessex's power as it evolved from a regional force into the core of a unified English kingdom. The legacy of Wessex persisted through its cultural contributions, including its influence on literature and governance, shaping the course of English history. The Kingdom of Wessex played a crucial role in shaping early medieval England through its military achievements, cultural contributions, and efforts toward political unification. From its founding by Cerdic to its height under Alfred and Athelstan, Wessex was central in forging a unified English identity that would persist through later historical changes. By the end of the 7th century, the major Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, Kent, and East Anglia, were locked in a relentless struggle for dominance. These kingdoms, although geographically distinct, were deeply interconnected through alliances, marriages, and, most notably, through conflict. As each kingdom sought to expand its influence, military engagements and political maneuvering shaped the landscape of early medieval England. The early 7th century saw Northumbria emerge as the dominant power under the rule of King Edwin, 1616 to 633 AD. Edwin's victory at the Battle of Hatfield Chase in 633 AD against a coalition of Penda of Mercia and Cadwallon of Gwynedd helped solidify his control over large parts of Britain. However, Northumbria's dominance was soon challenged by Mercia, which would rise to prominence under King Penda, 626 to 655 AD. Penda, a pagan ruler, fiercely resisted the Christianized Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and launched multiple campaigns against his neighbors. One of the most pivotal battles during this period was the Battle of Mayserfield in 642 AD, where Penda decisively defeated and killed Oswald of Northumbria, weakening Northumbrian power and allowing Mercia to expand its influence further. However, Penda's defeat at the Battle of Winwade in 655 AD, where he was killed by Oswiu of Northumbria, shifted the balance once again. Northumbria reasserted its dominance, but Mercia remained a formidable force, recovering quickly under Wulfa, 658 to 675 AD, and later Ethelred, 675 to 704 AD. As the 8th century progressed, Wessex began to assert itself, although Mercia, under kings like Ethelbald, 716 to 757 AD, and Offa, 757 to 796 AD, remained the most powerful kingdom. Offa, in particular, is remembered for his territorial expansion and the construction of Offa's Dyke, which fortified Mercia's western borders against Welsh incursions. Wessex, under King Cinewulf, 757 to 786 AD, clashed repeatedly with Mercia in attempts to resist Mercian domination. The Battle of Bensington in 779 AD saw Offa defeat Cinewulf of Wessex, asserting Mercian dominance over southern England. However, the pivotal Battle of Ellendon in 825 AD would mark the beginning of the end for Mercia's supremacy. King Ecgbert of Wessex defeated Beornwulf of Mercia at this battle, resulting in Wessex gaining control over Kent, Sussex, and Surrey. This victory established Wessex as the dominant power in southern England and laid the foundation for Wessex's eventual unification of England. While the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were engaged in internal conflicts, a new external threat began to emerge in the late 8th century: the Vikings. The first recorded Viking raid on England occurred in 793 AD, with the devastating attack on the monastery at Lindisfarne in Northumbria. This event marked the beginning of a series of Viking raids and invasions that would destabilize the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms for the next several centuries. The Great Heathen Army, a large force of Viking warriors, arrived in 865 AD and launched a full-scale invasion. This army was led by the sons of the legendary Viking Ragnar Lothbrok, including Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan Ragnarsson, and Ubba Ragnarsson. The Vikings quickly overran East Anglia, defeating and executing King Edmund the Martyr in 869 AD. East Anglia, after Edmund's death, was absorbed into the Danelaw, the territory under Viking control. The Battle of York in 866 AD saw the Vikings capture the important city of York, further weakening Northumbria, which had already been ravaged by internal strife. Northumbria's power diminished significantly after this defeat, and the kingdom was eventually divided between English and Viking-controlled lands. By the late 9th century, the Viking threat had spread to Mercia and Wessex. Mercia suffered significant losses, with the Vikings capturing Derby, Leicester, Nottingham and Stamford, which became part of the Danelaw. By 877 AD, Mercia had been divided between Viking-controlled lands and those still under English rule. However, it was in Wessex that the most decisive resistance to the Vikings emerged. King Alfred the Great, 871 to 899 AD, of Wessex successfully repelled the Vikings at the Battle of Ashdown in 871 AD, securing a major victory against the Great Heathen Army. Alfred's reign is notable for his military innovations, such as the creation of burhs, fortified towns, and the establishment of a navy, which helped protect Wessex from further Viking incursions. The Battle of Edington in 878 AD marked a significant turning point. Alfred defeated the Viking leader Guthrum, forcing him to convert to Christianity and sign the Treaty of Wedmore, which established boundaries between Wessex and the Danelaw. This victory not only preserved Wessex's independence, but also set the stage for the eventual unification of England under Alfred's successors. While Wessex managed to resist the Vikings, the northern and eastern regions of England remained under Danish control. The 10th century saw Edward the Elder, 899 to 924 AD, Alfred's son, and Ethelflaed, Lady of the Mercians, lead successful campaigns to reclaim territory from the Danes. King Athelstan, Alfred's grandson, achieved the unification of England after his victory at the Battle of Brunanburh in 937 AD, where he defeated a coalition of Vikings, Scots, and Britons. This battle is often considered one of the most significant in the history of early England, securing Athelstan's rule over the newly unified kingdom. The Anglo-Saxon period, circa 410 to 1066 AD, is one of the most formative in the history of England. Despite the relative scarcity of written records compared to later periods, a wide range of sources, written texts, archaeological discoveries, artifacts and inscriptions offer invaluable insights into this era. Together, these sources help reconstruct the political, cultural and social transformations that shaped early medieval England. Below is a detailed examination of the most important sources that historians rely on to understand the Anglo-Saxon world. Perhaps the most significant source from the Anglo-Saxon period is the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. This historical record was initiated during the reign of King Alfred the Great in the late 9th century and is a compilation of year-by-year entries documenting major events such as battles, royal successions, and natural phenomena. The Chronicle was not a single document, but a collection of manuscripts, often updated by monks across different regions of England. As a result, there are variations among the different versions, which sometimes provide unique local perspectives on the same events. This chronicle gives us detailed accounts of significant events, such as the Viking invasions, the rise of Alfred the Great, and the unification of England under Athelstan. The chronicle is invaluable for understanding political changes, military campaigns, and the expansion of Christianity during this period. However, it is also important to acknowledge that it often reflects the interests of the ruling elites, particularly the Wessex dynasty, and may contain biases in favour of their perspective. The Venerable Bede's work, Ecclesiastical History of the English People, written in 731 AD, is one of the earliest and most important narratives of Anglo-Saxon England. As a monk in Northumbria, Bede offers a detailed account of the Christianization of the Anglo-Saxons, which he viewed as a transformative event. His work focuses on the spread of Christianity, the role of missionaries, and the establishment of monasteries. Bede's account is particularly valuable for understanding the conversion of King Ethelbert of Kent by St. Augustine in 597 AD, the pivotal event that sparked the spread of Christianity in southern England. The role of Irish missionaries like St. Aidan, who founded the monastery at Lindisfarne, a key religious centre in the north, Pope Gregory the Great's mission to England, which initiated the formal Christianization of the Anglo-Saxons. Bede's historical method was highly advanced for his time. He used multiple sources, including earlier records, oral traditions, and documents from Rome. His work is one of the most reliable written sources from the period and provides a clear window into both spiritual life and the political landscape of the early 8th century. His perspective, however, is deeply Christian, and his narrative often reflects the religious bias of a monk who viewed the conversion of the pagan Anglo-Saxons as a divine mission. A rich source of information on Anglo-Saxon governance and society comes from the legal codes and charters issued by various kings. These documents offer direct evidence of how the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were organized, what legal structures existed, and the relationships between kings, nobles, and the church. Law codes were issued by several prominent kings, including King Ine of Wessex, 688–726 AD, developed one of the earliest surviving law codes. It outlined criminal punishments, property rights, and compensation for injuries. Ine's laws reveal much about the social hierarchy, particularly the legal distinctions between freemen, nobles, and slaves. King Alfred's Law Code, circa 893 AD, is one of the most famous. Alfred combined traditional Anglo-Saxon laws with Christian ethics, using biblical references to justify his legal reforms. His laws address not only issues like theft and homicide, but also moral offences, such as breaking religious oaths. Charters provide further insights into land ownership, royal privileges, and the influence of the church. These documents, often grants of land from kings to their supporters or to religious institutions, contain detailed witness lists, which are invaluable for identifying the major political players of the time. One of the most famous charters is the Izmir Diploma from 736 AD, which documents King Ethelbald of Mercia's grant of land to a monastery. These records help historians trace how power was distributed among the nobility and the church, and how alliances were maintained. While much of our understanding of the Anglo-Saxon period comes from historical documents, Old English literature provides a cultural perspective reflecting the values, beliefs, and social structures of the time. The most famous example is the epic poem Beowulf, which, although set in Scandinavia, reflects the heroic ideals of Anglo-Saxon society. Key themes in Beowulf, such as loyalty to one's lord, the importance of kinship ties, and the ever-present threat of violence and warfare, mirror the realities of Anglo-Saxon life. The poem also provides insights into warrior culture, where personal valor and fealty to a king or lord were highly prized. Other notable works include The Battle of Maldon, a heroic poem that recounts the Anglo-Saxon defence against a Viking raid in 991 AD. The Wanderer and the Seafarer. These elegiac poems explore themes of exile, fate, and the transient nature of life, reflecting both the spiritual and warrior ethos of the Anglo-Saxon world. Through these literary sources, we gain a deeper understanding of Anglo-Saxon identity, not just as a historical and political construct, but as a cultural and psychological one. While written records provide narrative accounts, archaeological evidence is essential for understanding the material culture of the Anglo-Saxons. One of the most spectacular archaeological finds is the Sutton Hoo ship burial, discovered in 1939 in Suffolk. Believed to be the burial site of an East Anglian king, possibly Redwald, the grave contained an extraordinary array of treasures. A burial ship over 80 feet long, a richly decorated helmet, swords and shield, gold and silver artifacts, including intricate brooches and a lavish belt buckle. The Sutton Hoo finds reveal the craftsmanship, wealth and funerary customs of the Anglo-Saxon elite. Other archaeological sites such as Lindisfarne, Winchester and Jorvik, York, offer additional evidence of daily life, trade and religious practices. Excavations of Anglo-Saxon villages, monasteries and burial sites continue to reveal new information about social organization, agriculture, and the impact of Viking raids on Anglo-Saxon communities. Coins minted by Anglo-Saxon kings, particularly from the 7th century onward, provide a wealth of information about political authority and economic exchanges. The coinage of kings like Offa of Mercia and Alfred the Great often featured inscriptions of their names and titles, sometimes alongside Christian symbols, reflecting both their political claims and their embrace of Christianity. Runic inscriptions found on items such as the Frank's casket and the Ruthwell cross also offer insights into language, art and religious beliefs. These inscriptions are often in Old English or Latin and provide a direct link to the religious and cultural transformations of the Anglo-Saxon world. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were not isolated. They maintained diplomatic and trade relations with continental Europe and Scandinavia. Sources such as Frankish annals, Irish chronicles, and Viking sagas offer external perspectives on Anglo-Saxon England. For example, the Annals of Saint-Bertin, a Frankish chronicle, records diplomatic relations between King Offa of Mercia and Charlemagne, highlighting the importance of Anglo-Saxon rulers in European politics. Similarly, Viking sagas, though written down centuries later, provide details of Viking raids on Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, especially during the 9th and 10th centuries. The Anglo-Saxon period is understood through a rich and diverse array of sources, from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and Bede's writings to archaeological finds like Sutton Hoo. Each source offers a unique window into the world of early medieval England. These sources, though varied in origin and perspective, together create a detailed tapestry of political, religious, and cultural life during the Anglo-Saxon era, helping historians piece together the rise and fall of kingdoms, the spread of Christianity, and the eventual unification of England. The Anglo-Saxon period was not only marked by political struggles and military campaigns, but also by remarkable intellectual and scholarly achievements. Two of the most prominent figures who played crucial roles in shaping the religious and intellectual landscape of early medieval England were the Venerable Bede and Alcuin of York. Their works laid the foundation for medieval scholarship and greatly influenced the cultural and spiritual development of Anglo-Saxon England and beyond. In this chapter, we will explore the lives, contributions, and legacies of these two towering figures. The Venerable Bede, often referred to simply as Bede, was born around 673 AD in the Kingdom of Northumbria, one of the most powerful and culturally rich kingdoms of Anglo-Saxon England. At the age of 7, he was sent to Monk Wearmouth Jarrow Abbey, a twin monastery led by Abbot Benedict Biscop, where he was educated and would remain for most of his life. The monastery housed a vast library filled with Latin texts, including works of theology, history, and classical authors, providing Bede with the intellectual resources that would shape his scholarship. Bede became a monk, theologian, historian, and teacher, and he spent his life studying, writing, and teaching within the monastery. He was ordained as a deacon at the age of 19 and a priest at 30, which was a testament to his early display of deep learning and piety. Bede's most famous work, Ecclesiastical History of the English People, written in 731 AD, is a monumental achievement that offers a comprehensive history of the Christianization of England and the early Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Divided into 5 books, Bede's history traces the origins of Christianity in Britain from the time of Roman occupation to the missionary efforts of St. Augustine of Canterbury, who arrived in 597 AD under the orders of Pope Gregory the Great. Key features of the ecclesiastical history. Bede details the conversion of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, including the pivotal role of King Ethelbert of Kent, who embraced Christianity following the mission of St. Augustine. He chronicles the establishment of monasteries, bishoprics, and the spread of Christian learning across England. His work provides accounts of key figures in English Christianity, such as St. Aidan, Cuthbert, and Wilfrid, highlighting their contributions to the growth of the Church. Bede's work also discusses significant political events, making it one of the earliest examples of integrating secular and ecclesiastical history in Western historiography. Bede's history is also famous for popularizing the AD Anno Domini dating system, which remains in use today. His meticulous attention to detail, his use of sources, and his commitment to presenting an accurate and comprehensive history have earned him the title of the Father of English History. Born around 735 AD, the same year Bede completed his great work, Alcuin of York was another towering figure in Anglo-Saxon intellectual life. Alcuin grew up in the Kingdom of Northumbria, a region known for its scholarly centres. He was educated at the renowned York Cathedral School, where he studied under Archbishop Ecgbert and Elbert, who had established York as a centre of learning, particularly in theology and the liberal arts. Alcuin became a monk, scholar, teacher and poet, and by the mid-8th century he had risen to the position of headmaster of the York Cathedral School. The school at York housed a library containing classical and theological works, and under Alcuin's guidance, it became one of the most prestigious educational institutions in England. Alcuin's intellectual reputation spread across Europe, and in 781 AD, while on a diplomatic mission in Italy, he met Charlemagne, the king of the Franks. Charlemagne invited Alcuin to join his court as a teacher and scholar. Alcuin accepted and became one of the leading figures in the Carolingian Renaissance, a revival of learning and culture initiated by Charlemagne's court. At Charlemagne's court, Alcuin was responsible for reforming education, overseeing the development of monastic and cathedral schools, and promoting the study of grammar, rhetoric, astronomy, theology, and scripture. He played a crucial role in standardizing Latin as the language of scholarship and helped establish a scriptorium to copy and preserve important manuscripts. Alcuin's influence on Carolingian reforms extended beyond education. He advised Charlemagne on matters of religious policy and moral conduct, promoting the revival of monastic discipline and the reform of the Frankish Church. Alcuin also contributed to the development of Carolingian minuscule, a clear and legible script that allowed for the efficient copying of texts and became the foundation of modern Western script. Some of Alcuin's key contributions include his promotion of classical learning at the court of Charlemagne, helping to preserve and transmit ancient knowledge during a time when much of Europe was in turmoil. His role in the production and dissemination of Christian texts, which were copied in large numbers in the Carolingian scriptoria. His authorship of numerous theological treatises, letters and poems, many of which survive today as reflections on monastic life, Christian virtues and education. In 796 AD, Alcuin retired to the Abbey of St. Martin in Tours, where he continued to write and teach until his death in 804 AD. Even in retirement, Alcuin's influence was profound. He helped shape the next generation of scholars and religious leaders. His ideas on education and religious reform endured throughout the medieval period and became an integral part of the intellectual fabric of Western Europe. Alcuin's role in the Carolingian Renaissance was critical in bridging the intellectual worlds of Anglo-Saxon England and continental Europe. His work in education, language, and theology ensured that the achievements of the Greco-Roman world were passed on to future generations. While both Bede and Alcuin were key figures in Anglo-Saxon intellectual life, they worked in very different contexts. Bede remained in Northumbria for his entire life, dedicating himself to the monastic life and the task of chronicling the history of Christianity in England. His works reflect a deep engagement with Christian history and scholarly rigor within a strictly ecclesiastical framework. Alcuin, on the other hand, became an international figure, leaving England to serve at the court of Charlemagne. His work was broader, focusing on the revival of learning, educational reform, and the establishment of Christian culture in the broader context of Carolingian Europe. Together, these two figures represent the heights of Anglo-Saxon scholarship and the transmission of knowledge during the early medieval period. Bede's historical works provided a foundation for understanding the development of Christian England, while Alcuin's educational reforms ensured that learning and scholarship would continue to flourish across Europe. The legacies of Bede and Alcuin are profound. They both contributed to the preservation and transmission of knowledge during a period often seen as intellectually dark. Through their work, they laid the foundations for the medieval intellectual revival, influencing monastic education, Christian scholarship, and the overall cultural development of medieval Europe. Bede's focus on history and theology ensured that the Anglo-Saxon past would be remembered and celebrated, while Alcuin's efforts in education and language reform extended the reach of Anglo-Saxon learning far beyond England. Together, they helped define the intellectual legacy of the Anglo-Saxon period, and their contributions resonate even today. We are now leaping forward over a century to a time of transformation and turmoil. The age of Venerable Bede and Alcuin of York has passed, and the dawn of a new era has arrived. It is the late 9th century, and England is facing challenges unlike any before. As we move into the times of Alfred the Great, we witness not just a shift in leadership, but a fight for survival itself, a fight that would shape the future of the English kingdoms forever. Let us now delve into the world of Alfred, a king facing Viking invasions, a realm in need of unity and a vision that would redefine what it meant to be English. It is the year 878. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms are in ruins, their lands shattered by a relentless Viking invasion. The great Christian monasteries of Lindisfarne and Iona have been pillaged, Northumbria has fallen, and Mercia has been subdued. One by one, the kingdoms have fallen under the weight of the great heathen army, a vast force of Viking warriors led by the most feared chieftains of the time. Men like Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan Ragnarsson, and Ubba, all sons of the semi-legendary Ragnar Lothbrok. They came not just to plunder, but to conquer. The Viking conquest was more than just raiding. It was a war for control of the land. Now only one kingdom remains, Wessex, ruled by a young king named Alfred the Great. His forces are battered and his kingdom is on the brink of collapse. The once mighty line of Anglo-Saxon kings, the line of Cerdic, now rests on the shoulders of one man, Alfred. But this is not just a fight for a kingdom. This is a fight for survival. If Wessex falls, there will be no England, no future for the Anglo-Saxon people. The Viking onslaught will consume the last vestiges of resistance, and the land that we now call England will be ruled by the invaders. But Alfred was no ordinary king. In the most desperate hour, with his forces scattered and the enemy at the gates, Alfred would rise from the swamps of Somerset to lead one of the most remarkable comebacks in history. Through clever strategy, innovation, and sheer will, Alfred would not only defeat the Vikings, but he would lay the foundations for what would eventually become the Kingdom of England. The Viking Age was a time of immense upheaval across Europe, a period defined by fearsome raiders who sailed the seas, plundering the rich coastlines and striking terror into the hearts of Christian kingdoms. But by the mid-9th century, the Vikings were no longer content with simply raiding. They were here to conquer. The Viking Age didn't begin with the infamous raid on Lindisfarne, but rather in 789 AD, when the first recorded Viking attack took place on the Isle of Portland, off the coast of Wessex. A group of Viking warriors landed unexpectedly, and when a royal official attempted to collect taxes, he was killed, a brutal foreshadowing of the violence that would define the coming decades. This marked the first violent encounter between the Anglo-Saxons and the Viking invaders, though it passed with relatively little notice. But it wasn't until the raid on Lindisfarne in 793 AD that the full scale of the Viking threat became apparent. Lindisfarne, a peaceful Christian monastery on the northeastern coast of Northumbria, was brutally sacked by the Vikings. This sacred place, home to monks and religious treasures, was reduced to ruin. Monks were slaughtered, and religious relics were stolen or destroyed. The Christian world was shaken to its core. The raid on Lindisfarne signalled that the Vikings were no longer merely isolated marauders, but a force capable of striking at the heart of Christian society. Why did the Vikings target these sites, and how did this shift from raiding to conquest take hold? The wealth stored in monasteries, gold, silver and treasures, made them prime targets for Viking raiders, but the significance of these attacks went beyond plunder. The raids on Portland and Lindisfarne were the opening chapters of a much larger story, a story that would evolve from mere raiding to full-scale conquest of Anglo-Saxon lands. In 865, a monumental shift occurred when a vast Viking force known as the Great Heathen Army landed in England. This was no mere raiding party. Led by the sons of the legendary warrior Ragnar Lothbrok, the Great Heathen Army came with a singular purpose: to conquer Anglo-Saxon England. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, this force swept across the land, and no kingdom seemed strong enough to stand in their way. The Great Heathen Army was led by some of the most feared Viking chieftains in history, Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan Ragnarsson, and Ubba. These men were the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, a semi-legendary figure whose death at the hands of the Anglo-Saxons sparked their thirst for revenge. The saga of Ragnar's death, thrown into a pit of snakes by King Aella of Northumbria, fueled the fury of his sons, driving them to seek not just retribution, but domination. The Great Heathen Army began its conquest in Northumbria. By 867, York, the great city of the north, had fallen. The once proud kingdom of Northumbria was no more. Next, the Vikings turned south to East Anglia, where King Edmund met his fate. Legend has it that Edmund was tied to a tree and riddled with arrows before being beheaded by the Viking conquerors. He would later become known as Saint Edmund, a martyr for the Christian cause. But despite his sainthood, East Anglia was lost. One by one, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms fell to the Viking onslaught. But what made Wessex so different? Why was Alfred's kingdom the only one to survive? By 870, only Wessex remained. The kingdoms of Northumbria, Mercia, and East Anglia had been subdued, their kings either dead or paying tribute to the Viking warlords. The once great Anglo-Saxon heptarchy had been reduced to a single kingdom. But Wessex was different. Its king Ethelred and his younger brother Alfred were determined to resist the Viking tide. In 871, Wessex stood on the brink of destruction. That year would come to be known as the Year of Battles, as Alfred and Ethelred led their forces into a series of bloody confrontations with the Vikings. In total, 9 battles were fought that year. Wessex survived, just barely. But who was Alfred, this young prince, who would soon take on the mantle of leadership in Wessex? What had shaped him into the man who would later be known as Alfred the Great? Alfred was born in 849, the youngest son of Ethelwulf, King of Wessex. His early years were not marked by military prowess or royal authority, but by something quite different: faith and learning. Alfred, unlike his warrior brothers, had a deep fascination with scholarship. As a child, he was sent to Rome, where he met the Pope and was exposed to the broader Christian world. He was anointed by the Pope as a young boy, which gave him a sense of divine purpose that would later shape his rule. At that time, he also travelled through Frankish Gaul and found out about different cultural and political systems. This broad knowledge later distinguished him from other English kings and helped him to overcome all obstacles he faced. How did this young boy, more drawn to the world of books and faith, become the warrior king that would save Wessex from the brink of destruction? Though Alfred's early interests were in scholarship, his destiny would be shaped by warfare. As the youngest of several sons, he was never expected to rule. His older brothers, including Ethelred, were the ones leading Wessex into battle. But as the Viking threat grew, fate would thrust Alfred into a role he had never anticipated. In 871, Wessex suffered a tragic blow. King Ethelred died after a series of brutal battles with the Vikings. Suddenly, the weight of the kingdom rested on the shoulders of young Alfred. He was now King of Wessex, and his first task was to defend his realm from the relentless Viking invasion. What was Alfred's first act as king, and how would he face the overwhelming Viking force that had already laid waste to most of Anglo-Saxon England? Alfred's early reign was marked by immediate crisis. The great heathen army, led by Guthrum, a Viking warlord, was ravaging Wessex. The pressure on Alfred was immense. At just 22 years old, he was tasked with defending the last remaining Anglo-Saxon kingdom. In a series of bloody battles, Alfred struggled to hold the Vikings at bay. One of the most significant confrontations occurred at the Battle of Ashdown in 871, where Alfred, fighting alongside his brother Ethelred, led a fierce charge against the Viking forces. Though the battle was a tactical victory for Wessex, it was far from a decisive blow to the Vikings. The Viking army, as relentless as ever, continued its campaigns, and Alfred's forces were battered, his kingdom slowly being worn down by the seemingly endless onslaught. Alfred's challenges were not just military. Internally, Wessex was suffering from years of conflict. Crops had been destroyed by Viking raids, villages burned, and the people of Wessex were exhausted, fearful that their kingdom would soon fall like the others before it. Alfred, though a young and relatively inexperienced king, understood that his fight was not just for victory on the battlefield. It was for the survival of his people. But how could Alfred, leading a battered and demoralized force, possibly stand against the full might of the Vikings? What plan did he have to save Wessex from destruction? This would be Alfred's true test. Unlike his predecessors, who focused solely on battle, Alfred began to think in terms of long-term strategy. He knew that to defeat the Vikings, he needed to not just win battles, but also change the very way Wessex defended itself. Wessex's survival would depend not just on strength, but on cleverness, innovation, and resilience. As Alfred's forces regrouped, the king started to implement a series of revolutionary changes. He envisioned a new kind of warfare, one that would be less reliant on immediate, head-on battles and more focused on defensive strategy. Alfred began to understand that the Vikings thrived on their ability to move quickly, to strike unexpectedly, and to devastate lands that had little defense. Wessex needed to become a kingdom that could withstand these raids, a kingdom that could resist, recover, and ultimately repel the invaders. It's the year 878, and the Viking conquest of England is nearly complete. The once great Anglo-Saxon kingdoms have fallen like dominoes, one after another. Northumbria, East Anglia, Mercia, all subdued by the relentless, great heathen army. And now, the final and most daunting challenge lies before the Vikings, the Kingdom of Wessex, under the young king Alfred the Great. But this is not Alfred at the height of his power. This is Alfred in crisis, a king who has just suffered one of the most catastrophic defeats of his reign. In January of 878, the Viking forces under the command of Guthrum, one of their most fearsome leaders, launched a surprise attack on Alfred's court at Chippenham, a royal stronghold in the heart of Wessex. It was a bitterly cold winter, and Alfred's army had been caught completely off guard. How could such a young, promising king, now the last hope of Anglo-Saxon England, allow his forces to be overrun so suddenly? The Vikings had become masters of deception and swift assaults. While Alfred's forces were resting after a long winter of battles, Guthrum's army moved quietly and decisively under the cover of night. The attack was devastating. Alfred's forces, unprepared and outmaneuvered, were utterly defeated. The Battle of Chippenham would go down as one of the greatest calamities for Wessex. For Alfred, this defeat was more than just a lost battle. It was the near total destruction of his kingdom. The Viking forces were now entrenched deep in Wessex, and Alfred's army had been decimated. The once defiant king was forced to flee for his life, his kingdom in ruins, and his people scattered. With his forces shattered and Guthrum's Vikings hunting him, Alfred retreated to the swamps of Athelney in Somerset. These desolate, marshy lands provided the perfect hiding place for a king who had lost nearly everything. Here, Alfred lived in exile, cut off from his people, with only a few loyal men by his side. His kingdom, his army, and even his crown seemed lost. Alfred's story, however, does not end here. While he may have retreated physically, in spirit, Alfred was far from defeated. In these marshes, Alfred began to rebuild. He had been brought to his lowest point, but it was from this moment of desperation that Alfred's legend would truly begin. It was during these months in the swamps of Athelney that one of the most famous legends of Alfred the Great was born, the story of the burning of the cakes. As the legend goes, Alfred, now in hiding and disguised as a simple wanderer, sought shelter in the hut of a local peasant woman. Not knowing that the man before her was the king, she tasked him with watching her cakes as they baked over the fire. Lost in thought, contemplating the fate of his kingdom and how he could possibly rally his people once more, Alfred allowed the cakes to burn. The woman, oblivious to his royal status, scolded him harshly for his carelessness. Despite the gravity of his situation, Alfred reportedly took the scolding in good humor. While this may seem like a small, even humorous moment in Alfred's life, it symbolizes something far greater: Alfred's humility and his resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. Even as a king, reduced to hiding in the marshes and being chastised for something as mundane as burning cakes, Alfred never lost sight of his ultimate goal: to save Wessex. But Alfred's time in the swamps was not wasted, far from it. In this moment of despair, Alfred began to devise a strategy that would not only reclaim Wessex, but would also turn the tide of history. He sent out secret messages to his loyal followers across the kingdom, rallying those who remained faithful to him. Slowly, from the shadows of the marshlands, a new force began to gather. But how could Alfred, with just a handful of loyal followers and a kingdom in ruins, possibly defeat the seemingly unstoppable Viking army that had already conquered so much of England? Alfred's genius lay in his understanding of strategy and guerrilla warfare. He knew that he could not face the Viking army head-on, not yet. Instead, he used the swamps and forests to his advantage, launching small, precise raids against Viking outposts, weakening their control over Wessex. Over the months, as winter turns to spring, Alfred's forces grew. The Anglo-Saxon people, hearing whispers of their king's survival, began to rally to his side. Hope, once lost, began to flicker in the hearts of his people. By Easter of 878, Alfred had gathered enough strength to face the Vikings once more. At Egbert's Stone, a historic meeting place in the heart of Wessex, Alfred's loyalists gathered, ready to follow their king into battle. This was more than just an army. It was a resistance, an entire people standing up against the invaders who had sought to destroy their way of life. This would be the moment of truth for Alfred and his kingdom. From the swamps of Athelney, a king reborn, Alfred would soon lead his forces into the Battle of Edington, a decisive clash that would change the course of English history forever. Alfred had been brought to his lowest point, his kingdom destroyed, his forces scattered, and his very survival in question. But from the swamps of Somerset, a king had risen. Through resilience, ingenuity, and sheer will, Alfred the Great would soon turn the tide of history. The fate of Wessex, and indeed the fate of what would become England, now rested on the outcome of one final battle. Alfred the Great's victory over the Vikings was not merely the result of brute force or sheer numbers. It was the result of one man's strategic genius and his ability to adapt in the face of overwhelming odds. After years of being on the defensive, Alfred realized that the very survival of his kingdom would require fundamental changes, a transformation of Wessex's military and defensive systems. Alfred understood that while a single battle could be won or lost, the future of Wessex depended on a long-term strategy. But how did Alfred, a king who had just fled to the swamps, transform his kingdom into a fortress capable of resisting the Viking onslaught? Alfred's solution was nothing short of revolutionary. He envisioned a network of fortified towns, called burhs, pronounced boroughs, spread strategically across Wessex. These burhs were not just military outposts, but self-sustaining communities designed to withstand a siege and provide refuge for the local population. Alfred's burh system was a stroke of military brilliance. He understood that the only way to protect Wessex from Viking raids was to create a network of fortified towns that could resist attack long enough for Alfred's army to respond. By spreading these strongholds across the kingdom, Alfred ensured that no part of Wessex would be left vulnerable. Each burh was heavily fortified with earthworks, wooden palisades, and stone walls. Inside these fortifications, people could flee from the countryside during times of Viking raids, bringing with them food, livestock, and supplies to wait out the attack. This system created a buffer between the Viking invaders and the heart of Alfred's kingdom, allowing his forces time to mobilize. Could these newly constructed burhs truly hold back the Viking onslaught, or were they simply delaying the inevitable? The burhs proved to be immensely effective. When the Vikings attempted to raid Wessex in the years following their defeat at Edington, they found that the once easy targets, villages and towns, were now heavily fortified and capable of withstanding prolonged attacks. These fortified towns became a defensive network, preventing the Vikings from moving freely across Wessex, as they had in the past. The burhs not only protected the people, but also cut off Viking supply lines, limiting their ability to wage sustained campaigns in the region. But fortifications alone would not be enough. Alfred knew that his military forces needed to evolve. The traditional Anglo-Saxon army, known as the fyrd, was a militia-based system in which farmers would take up arms when their lords called them to fight. This system had worked in earlier centuries, but the Viking threat required something more, a professional standing army that could respond quickly to raids and invasions. But how could Alfred, whose kingdom had been weakened by years of conflict, create a professional army capable of standing against the battle-hardened Vikings? Alfred's innovation was to split the fyrd into two rotating groups. One group would remain on active duty, ready to respond to threats at a moment's notice, while the other group would remain at home to tend to the fields and ensure that the kingdom's agricultural base remained intact. This system allowed Alfred to maintain a permanent defensive force without crippling the economy of Wessex. The new professional army trained continuously, improving their skills in shield wall tactics, spear formations, and archery. Alfred also began to adopt some of the Viking tactics, learning from their strategies and incorporating them into his own military doctrine. Alfred knew that to truly protect Wessex, he couldn't just defend the land, he needed to defend the seas. The Vikings were masters of naval warfare, their long ships allowing them to move quickly along the coastlines, striking wherever they pleased. To counter this, Alfred did something no other Anglo-Saxon king had done before. He created a navy. But how could Alfred, with no prior naval experience, hope to compete against the Viking longships, which had terrorized the seas for decades? Alfred ordered the construction of large warships, designed specifically to counter the Viking longships. These ships were longer and sturdier, capable of carrying more men and withstanding the rough seas of the English Channel. While the Viking longships were fast and maneuverable, Alfred's ships were built for combat, with the goal of engaging the Vikings directly and preventing them from landing their raiding parties. Alfred's navy was not immediately successful in every engagement, but over time the Anglo-Saxon fleet became a formidable force. By patrolling the coasts and intercepting Viking ships before they could land, Alfred's navy provided a critical layer of defence for Wessex. The Vikings could no longer rely on their swift raids. They now had to contend with a well-defended coastline. But Alfred's reforms didn't end on the battlefield. He knew that for Wessex to truly survive and prosper, it needed more than just military strength. It needed a strong foundation of law, education, and governance. Alfred believed that a well-governed kingdom would be more resilient in the face of external threats. And so he set about reforming the very structure of Anglo-Saxon society. But could a king born and raised in a time of constant warfare really transform his kingdom into a centre of learning and law? Alfred was not just a warrior king, he was a scholar. He personally worked to translate Latin texts into Old English, believing that knowledge should be accessible to all. He reformed the legal system, creating a code of laws that blended Christian principles with traditional Anglo-Saxon customs. This legal code ensured that justice was consistent and that the people of Wessex could live under the rule of law rather than the rule of fear. He invited scholars from across Europe to his court, establishing Wessex as a centre of learning and scholarship. This investment in education helped to strengthen the cultural identity of the Anglo-Saxon people, making them more united in their resistance against the Viking invaders. Alfred's reforms transformed Wessex from a kingdom on the verge of collapse into a fortress of resilience. His innovations in military strategy, defence and governance would lay the groundwork for a united England. No longer would Wessex be vulnerable to the whims of Viking raids. The people had places to flee, armies to defend them, and a king who cared not only for their survival, but for their future prosperity. But would all of these reforms be enough? With Wessex fortified and prepared for battle, Alfred now faced the ultimate test, the Battle of Edington, where the fate of the kingdom would be decided once and for all. In May of 878, after months of preparation, strategy and hidden resistance, the moment of truth had finally arrived for Alfred the Great and the people of Wessex. Everything, his kingdom, his people, and his very legacy, would be decided in one climactic confrontation, the Battle of Edington. The Viking warlord Guthrum, who had already ravaged much of Wessex, now sought to end Alfred's resistance once and for all. His great heathen army, though battered by months of guerrilla warfare and Alfred's growing defence network, remained a formidable force. The Vikings, notorious for their skill in battle and their thirst for conquest, were ready to crush what little remained of Anglo-Saxon opposition. But this time Alfred was prepared. Alfred had not come to this moment by chance. His months in the swamps, his strategic reforms, and his meticulous planning had all been leading to this. While the Vikings prepared for what they thought would be an easy victory, Alfred had something else in mind, a battle for the very survival of his kingdom. Alfred's genius lay not just in his military reforms, but in his ability to inspire loyalty and resilience among his people. He had spent months rallying his army, recruiting loyal nobles, and building a network of fortified burhs that had slowed down the Viking advance. Now, with the support of his newly trained standing army and the defenders of Wessex, Alfred knew he had one advantage Guthrum didn't: home soil. Alfred carefully positioned his army at Edington, a location where he could use the terrain to his advantage. It was here that the future of Wessex, and indeed what would one day become England, would be decided. As the sun rose over the horizon, the two forces stood face to face, thousands of men on both sides, each prepared to fight to the death. For Guthrum and his Vikings, this was their chance to finally conquer Wessex and secure the last Anglo-Saxon kingdom under their control. For Alfred, this was his final stand, his last hope to save his people. With his forces in position, Alfred ordered his men into the shield wall, a formation designed to withstand the brutal frontal assaults of the Viking berserkers. As the Vikings charged across the field, their infamous war cries echoing through the air, Alfred's men held their ground, shields locked, spears braced. The clash of iron filled the battlefield as the Viking onslaught smashed into Alfred's shield wall. The shield wall was a tactic used by both Anglo-Saxon and Viking armies, and it required not just strength but discipline and endurance. The first few minutes of the battle were critical. If Alfred's men could hold their formation, they could survive the initial Viking onslaught. If they broke, the battle and the future of Wessex would be lost. Alfred's men, trained and hardened by months of preparation, held fast. The shield wall bent but did not break. Slowly but surely, they began to push back, using their spears to jab through the gaps in the Viking formation. The battle turned into a grueling, close-quarters fight with neither side giving an inch. For hours the battle raged on, neither side willing to give up. But Alfred, ever the strategist, had not simply relied on defense. As his shield wall held firm, he ordered his reserves, a group of fresh, well-rested soldiers, to launch a counterattack on the Viking flank. The Anglo-Saxon counterattack hit the Viking flank with devastating force. Guthrum's army, caught off guard by the sudden maneuver, began to falter. The disciplined ranks of Alfred's soldiers pushed forward, and the Viking forces, once so confident of their victory, began to break under the relentless pressure. The tide had turned. By the end of the day, Guthrum's army was in tatters, their forces broken, and their dream of conquering Wessex shattered. Alfred had done the impossible. He had not only survived the Viking onslaught, but had delivered a decisive blow to their ambitions. Rather than pursue a campaign of destruction, Alfred saw an opportunity to negotiate peace. He met with Guthrum and offered terms that would reshape the future of both Wessex and the Vikings. The result was the historic Treaty of Wedmore. Guthrum agreed to convert to Christianity, and Alfred stood as his godfather during his baptism. The Vikings retreated to East Anglia, and a fragile peace was established. The Treaty of Wedmore marked a turning point in Anglo-Saxon and Viking relations. Guthrum and his Vikings would settle in the east in what became known as the Danelaw, a region where Viking law and customs would prevail. Meanwhile, Wessex, under Alfred's rule, would remain free of Viking control. But would this peace last, or was it merely a temporary reprieve from the Viking threat? Though the Treaty of Wedmore established a fragile peace, Alfred knew that the Vikings could return at any time. This peace gave Alfred the breathing room he needed to continue strengthening Wessex, building up his defences and laying the foundation for what would eventually become a unified England. The Battle of Edington had been a resounding success for Alfred the Great. Against all odds, he had defeated the great heathen army led by Guthrum, securing a victory that would go down in history. But victory on the battlefield was only the beginning. Alfred knew that if Wessex was to survive, he needed to ensure a lasting peace, not just for himself, but for his people, who had endured years of devastation at the hands of the Vikings. But how could Alfred, a king of a relatively small kingdom, ensure peace with the Vikings, a force that had terrorized the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms for years? Could a treaty with these fearsome invaders really last? Alfred understood that true victory didn't always come through continued fighting. Sometimes it came through diplomacy. In the aftermath of Edington, Alfred made the bold decision to negotiate with Guthrum, a decision that would shape the future of Anglo-Saxon England. After the defeat at Edington, Guthrum had few options left. His army was shattered, his ambitions for Wessex dashed, and his men demoralized. But Guthrum was not without power. He still controlled vast lands in East Anglia, and his Vikings still held sway over large parts of England. For Alfred, this meeting was not simply about enforcing his victory. It was about securing a long-term peace that would protect his people from future Viking raids. Both leaders had much to gain, but also much to lose. But could Alfred trust Guthrum? Could a Viking warlord, whose people had ravaged England for decades, really be trusted to honor a peace agreement? Alfred knew that peace with the Vikings would only be possible under strict conditions. He demanded that Guthrum agree to convert to Christianity as a sign of his commitment to peace. Conversion was more than a religious act. It was a powerful symbol of submission. By becoming Christian, Guthrum would be signaling his acceptance of Alfred's authority and the laws of Wessex. In one of the most extraordinary moments in Anglo-Saxon history, Guthrum, the fierce Viking warlord who had once sought to conquer all of England, agreed to be baptized into the Christian faith. His baptism was not only a religious ceremony, but a public declaration of peace. By embracing Christianity, Guthrum was acknowledging Alfred's authority, and in a symbolic gesture, Alfred stood as Guthrum's godfather. For Alfred, the conversion of Guthrum was a victory not just of arms, but of spirit. By bringing Guthrum into the Christian fold, Alfred had achieved what few Anglo-Saxon kings before him had done. He had not only defeated the Vikings on the battlefield, but had also drawn them into his world, his culture, and his religion. However, Alfred knew that a religious conversion alone wouldn't be enough to secure lasting peace. He needed a more concrete solution, a political arrangement that would clearly define the boundaries between Viking and Anglo-Saxon lands. In the summer of 878, the terms of peace were formalized in the Treaty of Wedmore. This treaty established a clear division between Viking-controlled territories and Anglo-Saxon lands. Guthrum and his forces would withdraw to East Anglia, where they would settle and rule under Viking law in what would become known as the Danelaw. Danelaw was a region of England where Viking law and customs would dominate. It stretched from Northumbria in the north to East Anglia in the southeast, encompassing the lands the Vikings had already conquered. Under the terms of the treaty, Guthrum and his people could rule these lands independently, free from Anglo-Saxon interference. For Alfred, the Treaty of Wedmore was a necessary compromise. By allowing the Vikings to settle in Danelaw, he secured the safety of Wessex and the remaining Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. The treaty allowed both sides to regroup, the Vikings to settle and rule their newly acquired lands, and Alfred to strengthen his defences and consolidate his power. The Danelaw and Wessex would now exist side by side, two vastly different societies living on the same island. In the Viking territories, Norse law and customs held sway. Viking settlers who had once come to England as raiders now built towns, farmed the land, and engaged in trade. Their society was still warlike, but they had begun to establish a more settled way of life in East Anglia. Meanwhile, under Alfred's rule, Wessex began to recover. The fortifications, the military reforms, and the legal systems Alfred had put in place allowed his people to rebuild their lives. Anglo-Saxon society, though battered by years of war, remained resilient. For the moment, a fragile peace existed. The Treaty of Wedmore had given both sides the space they needed to recover. But Alfred knew that peace was always fragile. The Vikings were still a warrior society, and their desire for conquest had not disappeared. The establishment of the Danelaw was a pragmatic solution, but it was also a reminder that England was still divided. Though Danelaw marked the division of Viking and Anglo-Saxon lands, it also facilitated a period of cultural exchange between the two peoples. Viking settlers in England brought with them their customs, language, and legal traditions. Over time, Norse words entered the English language, and Viking craftsmanship and trading practices influenced Anglo-Saxon society. Trade between Viking and Anglo-Saxon territories flourished. Viking traders brought silver, furs, and weapons from Scandinavia, while Anglo-Saxon merchants traded grain, textiles, and livestock. These exchanges helped to foster a certain degree of cooperation, even as tensions simmered beneath the surface. Though the Treaty of Wedmore established a temporary peace, the divide between the Danelaw and Wessex was always tenuous. Alfred's reforms had created a stronger, more unified Wessex, but the Viking presence in England remained a constant threat. Though Alfred had secured peace with the Vikings, his vision for the future extended beyond the borders of Wessex. He dreamed of a united England, free from Viking control. The Treaty of Wedmore had given him the breathing room he needed to strengthen his kingdom, but it also laid the foundation for something greater, a kingdom that could one day unite all Anglo-Saxon territories and resist future Viking invasions. The Treaty of Wedmore brought a fragile peace to England, one that would last for several decades, but the Viking presence in England was far from over. The Danelaw, while a practical solution for the moment, was a constant reminder that the Vikings had not been fully driven from the land. Alfred the Great had secured Wessex and laid the groundwork for a united England, but the path ahead would still be fraught with challenges. The question of Viking control and the possibility of future raids loomed large on the horizon. While Alfred the Great is best remembered for his military victories and his defence of Wessex from the Viking invaders, his true greatness extended far beyond the battlefield. Alfred's reign was not just a time of war, it was a period of profound cultural revival. Despite the constant threat of Viking raids, Alfred was determined to rebuild not just his kingdom's defences, but also its intellectual and spiritual foundations. At the heart of Alfred's cultural achievements was his unwavering belief in the power of education, learning, and law to strengthen his kingdom. He understood that a strong kingdom was not built on swords and shields alone, but on the minds and souls of its people. Alfred's passion for learning was unusual for a king of his time, especially one raised in the midst of war. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Alfred had a deep respect for education. He believed that the Anglo-Saxon people, in order to prosper and defend their way of life, needed to be literate and well-educated. Alfred saw learning and governance as two sides of the same coin. He believed that wise rulers and well-informed citizens were essential to the stability and strength of Wessex. To that end, Alfred embarked on an ambitious mission to revive learning in his kingdom, particularly the knowledge that had been lost during years of war and Viking raids. One of Alfred's most significant contributions was the translation of important Latin texts into Old English, the common language of his people. He believed that knowledge should not be limited to the clergy or the elite, but should be accessible to all free men. Among the most famous works he translated, or had translated under his guidance, was Pope Gregory the Great's Pastoral Care, a guide for righteous and moral leadership. At the center of Alfred's spiritual and intellectual journey was his long-serving priest, Asa. A deeply devout man, Asa was more than just a religious figure. He was Alfred's spiritual guide, his confidant, and in many ways his moral compass. Asa's influence on Alfred cannot be overstated. In times of uncertainty, it was Asa who provided Alfred with the spiritual wisdom needed to navigate the turbulent waters of kingship. But how did a simple priest come to hold such an important place in the life of one of England's greatest kings? Asa had served as Alfred's priest for many years, even before the Viking invasions had reached their height. He was a quiet yet profoundly influential figure in Alfred's court. Asa's guidance helped Alfred balance his duties as a warrior king with his role as a protector of the Christian faith. It was Asa who reinforced Alfred's belief that God's favour was essential for the survival of Wessex, and that the king's duty was not just to defend his people, but to lead them spiritually. Under Asa's influence, Alfred took an active role in promoting Christianity throughout Wessex. He worked to rebuild churches that had been destroyed during the Viking raids, to restore monastic communities, and to ensure that the clergy were well educated in both religious and secular matters. Alfred's commitment to learning wasn't limited to religious texts. He also saw the need to reform the legal system in Wessex. He understood that justice and law were the cornerstones of a stable society. Drawing on the teachings of both Christianity and Anglo-Saxon tradition, Alfred created a code of laws that would serve as the foundation for his kingdom's governance. But how did Alfred, a king raised in the midst of war, create a system of laws that would endure for generations? Alfred's legal reforms were deeply rooted in Christian principles, but they also respected the ancient customs of the Anglo-Saxon people. His laws combined divine morality with practical governance, ensuring that justice was fair and accessible to all. Alfred's Doom Book, or Book of Laws, was a compilation of old Anglo-Saxon laws, Mosaic law, and the teachings of Christ. It sought to establish a sense of unity in a kingdom that had been fractured by war and invasion. These laws covered everything from theft and murder to land disputes and marriage rights. Crucially, they also emphasized the importance of mercy and fairness, reflecting Alfred's belief that a ruler should be both just and compassionate. Alfred's vision for Wessex went beyond war and law. He dreamed of a well-educated society where future generations could build upon the foundations he had laid. To this end, Alfred established the Palace School at his court, inviting scholars from across England and even from Europe to teach noble children and future leaders. Alfred understood that knowledge was power. He believed that the only way to ensure the long-term survival of Wessex, and indeed a united England, was to invest in the education of the next generation. He personally oversaw the curriculum of the Palace School, ensuring that his own children, along with the children of nobles, were taught in both Latin and Old English. The Palace School became a centre of learning, where students were taught scripture, philosophy, and history. Alfred also worked to ensure that the clergy in his kingdom were well educated, capable of leading their congregations with wisdom and understanding. It was through these efforts that Alfred laid the intellectual foundation for a united English identity. Throughout Alfred's reign, Asa remained a constant presence. While many of Alfred's advisors came and went, Asa stayed by his side until the end. His quiet faith and deep wisdom helped to shape Alfred's vision for Wessex, not just as a kingdom of warriors, but as a kingdom of faith, law, and learning. Asa's influence extended far beyond Alfred's personal faith. Under his guidance, Alfred became a king who saw the moral duty of leadership as essential to governance. The bond between king and priest was more than just political, it was spiritual. Asa's guidance helped Alfred to see his kingship as a divine mission, one that sought not only to defend Wessex, but to uplift his people. When Alfred the Great passed away in 899, his kingdom was forever changed. He had not only saved Wessex from the Viking onslaught, but he had also laid the foundations for what would become the United Kingdom of England. Alfred's legacy goes beyond his military victories. He was a king whose vision extended far into the future, shaping the course of English history long after his death. Though he is remembered as a warrior king, Alfred's greatest achievements were his cultural, legal, and administrative reforms. He turned Wessex into a stronghold of learning, law, and resilience, preparing his kingdom to face the challenges of the future. More importantly, he inspired his descendants and the Anglo-Saxon people to continue the work of unifying England even after his reign ended. Alfred's passion for education and learning had a profound and lasting impact on his kingdom. His efforts to revive literacy and scholarship among his people laid the intellectual groundwork for the eventual unification of England. Through his translations of Latin texts into Old English, Alfred ensured that knowledge and wisdom were accessible to all, not just the clergy or the elite. His establishment of the palace school and his dedication to educating both noble children and future leaders ensured that the next generation would carry forward his vision of a learned and cultured society. Alfred's emphasis on literacy also helped to preserve the Old English language, reinforcing a shared cultural identity among the Anglo-Saxon people that would later play a crucial role in the unification of the country. But how did these cultural gains survive after Alfred's death? Could his successors maintain the momentum of intellectual revival in the face of continued Viking threats? Alfred's successors, inspired by his dedication to learning and culture, continued his work. His son, Edward the Elder, and his grandson, Athelstan, built upon Alfred's legacy by promoting education and religious scholarship throughout their reigns. The royal court of Wessex remained a centre of intellectual activity, and the clergy, many of whom had been educated under Alfred's system, continued to play a key role in preserving and advancing knowledge. Alfred's cultural reforms had created a resilient society, one that was capable of withstanding external threats while maintaining its cultural identity. This cultural unity would become the bedrock of the future kingdom of England. While Alfred did not live to see the full unification of England, his vision was clear: a single united kingdom, free from the Viking threat, ruled under one law and one king. This dream would be realized by his descendants, particularly his grandson, Athelstan, who in 927 became the first king to rule over all of England. Alfred's military reforms, his legal system, and his emphasis on cultural unity laid the groundwork for this monumental achievement. His son, Edward the Elder, continued to strengthen Wessex and expand its influence by conquering parts of Mercia and East Anglia. Edward's military victories over Viking-held territories were a direct result of the fortification system Alfred had established, ensuring that Wessex remained strong even after his death. Athelstan, Alfred's grandson, took the unification process even further. Athelstan's military victories, particularly his decisive win at the Battle of Brunanburh in 937, cemented his position as the ruler of all England. Alfred's vision had finally been realized. England was now a united kingdom, no longer divided into separate Anglo-Saxon realms. One of Alfred's most enduring legacies was his reform of the legal system. His Doom Book became the basis for much of Anglo-Saxon law and, eventually, English common law. His code of laws combined Christian values with the traditional customs of the Anglo-Saxon people, creating a legal framework that emphasized justice, mercy, and fairness. Alfred's legal reforms not only endured, they became the foundation for the English legal tradition that still exists today. His emphasis on fair trials, written laws, and the importance of education in governance helped to stabilize Anglo-Saxon society during a time of great upheaval. Over the centuries, Alfred's legal principles would evolve and become enshrined in English common law, influencing the legal systems of many countries around the world. Through his legal reforms, Alfred ensured that future kings of England would rule not just by the sword, but by law and justice. This principle of just governance became a cornerstone of English society and helped to create a stable and unified kingdom. Alfred the Great was both a warrior and a scholar, a rare combination in a time of relentless warfare and political chaos. He defended Wessex with courage and tenacity, but he also understood that true strength came from knowledge, justice, and spiritual faith. Alfred's dedication to learning, his belief in the power of education, and his respect for the rule of law set him apart from many other rulers of his time. His cultural achievements were as important as his military victories, and his influence on English identity would resonate for generations. Alfred is remembered as the Great, not just for his military accomplishments, but for his ability to transform his kingdom, both culturally and politically. He was a king who, in the face of overwhelming odds, rebuilt a shattered kingdom and laid the groundwork for the creation of England. His vision of a united England, his commitment to education, and his reforms in law and government earned him a lasting place in history. Alfred's legacy extends far beyond the boundaries of his lifetime. His reign was a turning point for England, a moment when the Anglo-Saxon people, under his leadership, began the long journey toward a united kingdom that would survive the Viking invasions and flourish for centuries to come. Alfred the Great's reign was not just a pivotal moment in Anglo-Saxon history, it was the beginning of what would become the Kingdom of England. His military victories saved Wessex, but it was his vision for a united England, his commitment to law, and his belief in the power of education that ensured his place among the greatest kings in English history. The legacy of Alfred the Great is felt even today in the laws, traditions, and institutions of modern England. He is not just remembered for saving a kingdom, he is remembered for building a nation. It is 899 AD. The legendary King Alfred the Great is dead, and a new king must rise. Wessex, the last stronghold of Anglo-Saxon England, has stood resilient against the Viking invaders. Under Alfred's leadership, the kingdom held the line. But now, with Alfred gone, the crown passes to his son, Edward. Edward's rise to power is not without challenge. Ethelwald, a rival claimant, leads a rebellion seeking to seize the throne. Allied with the Vikings, his challenge threatens to tear Wessex apart from within. Yet Edward proves his strength, crushing the rebellion and solidifying his rule. The stakes are higher than ever. The Vikings are watching, waiting for any sign of weakness. If Edward falters, Wessex and the dream of a united England could crumble. But Edward is no ordinary heir. He is the son of Alfred, raised in the fires of war and driven by the same burning vision to unite all of England. Right now, the future of England rests on his shoulders. This is the story of Edward the Elder, a king thrust into a world where power is fought for in blood, where every decision could spell survival or destruction for his kingdom. When Alfred the Great died on the 26th of October 899, his son Edward inherited more than just a crown. He inherited the monumental responsibility of holding together Wessex, the last true Anglo-Saxon stronghold. The kingdom, though strong, was surrounded by enemies, with the ever-present threat of Vikings, who still controlled much of Danelaw to the north. But Edward's obstacles were not only external. His greatest initial challenge came from within his own bloodline, Ethelwald. Ethelwald, Edward's cousin, posed the first serious threat to his reign. A son of Alfred's older brother Ethelred I, Ethelwald believed the throne should have been his by right. Almost immediately after Alfred's death, Ethelwald declared himself king, seeking to capitalize on the uncertainty of a new reign. He didn't just question Edward's legitimacy, he actively raised an army, gathering support from parts of Wessex and even aligning himself with Viking forces. This rebellion posed an immense risk, not just because it divided loyalties within the kingdom, but because it opened the door to a Viking invasion. Ethelwald was willing to invite foreign invaders into Wessex to further his own ambitions, undermining everything Alfred had fought to protect. For Edward, the rebellion was more than a personal affront. It was a potential collapse of the kingdom from within. In 902, this internal strife came to a head at the Battle of the Home, where Ethelwald's rebellion was finally crushed. Though Ethelwald was killed, marking the end of his challenge to the throne, the battle itself revealed just how precarious Edward's hold on power had been. The cost of the rebellion was high, and it showed that Edward's greatest challenge as king wouldn't just be against the Vikings, but also maintaining internal unity in Wessex. But even after defeating Ethelwald, Edward's problems didn't end. The Vikings, who had long held sway over northern and eastern England, were always watching. Their presence was a constant threat to the stability of Wessex. Edward had to navigate the delicate balance between military action and diplomacy. Some Viking leaders were open to truces, while others sought to exploit any sign of weakness. The Danelaw was a fractured territory, and the Viking warlords within it were just as likely to fight amongst themselves as they were to launch raids against Wessex. Edward had to be vigilant, knowing that any misstep could lead to a renewed Viking onslaught. Internally, Edward also faced the pressure of living up to his father's legacy. Alfred the Great was not just a military hero. He had reformed the laws, rebuilt the church, and laid the foundation for a united England. Edward inherited that vision, but with it came the burden of proving that he could be a king worthy of the same respect. The ealdormen of Wessex, the powerful nobles who had served under Alfred, were loyal but cautious. They had fought alongside Alfred, and Edward knew that he had to win their trust through action, not just by right of blood. One of Edward's key allies in securing Wessex's future was his sister Ethelfled, Lady of Mercia. She had been a powerful force in her own right, ruling Mercia with strength and intelligence after her husband's death. Together, they formed a powerful alliance between Wessex and Mercia, a crucial bond in the fight against the Vikings. But even within Mercia, there were those who were hesitant to fully unite with Wessex, and after Ethelfled's death, Edward would have to navigate the fragile loyalty of the Mercian nobles. One of Edward's most trusted advisors was Plegmund, the Archbishop of Canterbury who had served his father. Plegmund provided spiritual legitimacy to Edward's reign, helping to secure the loyalty of the church, a vital ally in maintaining order and stability in the kingdom. With Plegmund's support, Edward was able to assert his control not only over Wessex, but also over the territories he would later conquer. The early years of Edward's reign were marked by constant obstacles, an internal rebellion, a fractured Viking territory, and the immense pressure of following in his father's footsteps. Yet, with determination and the support of key allies, Edward began to solidify his rule, paving the way for the eventual unification of England. But the path ahead was still uncertain. Could Edward truly stand in the shadow of Alfred? Could he keep Wessex united while fending off enemies from all sides? Would the Vikings and rebels test his resolve to the breaking point? The kingdom's fate rested on Edward's shoulders, but whether he had the power, the will, and the courage to overcome these monumental challenges, only time would tell. It's 902 AD, and Edward has finally crushed Ethelwald's rebellion, but the road ahead is anything but easy. Securing the crown was just the beginning. Now, Edward must face the Vikings, and he's not doing it alone. His sister, Ethelfled, Lady of Mercia, stands beside him. Together they will fight to defend the future of Anglo-Saxon England. Ethelfled, the eldest daughter of Alfred the Great, was raised in a time of war and chaos. From an early age she understood the responsibility that came with leadership. Married to Ethelred, the Lord of Mercia, Ethelfled became more than just a political figure. She was a warrior and a ruler in her own right. After Ethelred's death, she took full control of Mercia, an extraordinary position for a woman at the time, but she was no ordinary woman. As you've noticed throughout this video, the name Ethel appears frequently when referring to kings and nobility of the Anglo-Saxon period. But what exactly does Ethel mean? In Old English, Ethel translates to noble or noble-born. It was a common prefix used by many members of the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy, signifying their royal or noble status. For instance, Ethelfled, the daughter of Alfred, means noble beauty, while her husband Ethelred means noble counsel. Similarly, Edward's rebellious cousin Ethelwald means noble ruler. This prefix wasn't just a title, it carried with it the expectation of leadership, responsibility, and, most importantly, a commitment to defending their people. By including Ethel, they were reminding others of their noble lineage and their duty to the Anglo-Saxon world. And just as her name suggests, Ethelfled lived up to her noble roots. She was not just a ruler in name, she was a fierce leader on the battlefield, and in Mercia she earned the respect of her warriors and subjects alike. Ethelfled took on a role that few women of her time dared to claim. With her leadership, Mercia remained strong and resilient against Viking attacks. Wessex and Mercia are under constant attack. Viking raids continue to pound their borders, testing their defences, pushing them to the brink. The Vikings of Northumbria are relentless, launching raid after raid, hoping to break their spirit. Every raid is a message: you're next. Edward knows that Wessex and Mercia can't stand alone forever. They need to unite, or they will fall. So Edward and Ethelfled make their move. They form an alliance, two kingdoms fighting as one. Together, they lead their armies side by side against the Viking invaders. This is more than a fight for survival. This is a fight for the very future of England. Failure isn't an option. Then comes the moment that will define their reign, the Battle of Tettenhall in 910. The Vikings from Northumbria think they can deliver a crushing blow. They raid deep into Mercia, confident in their numbers, sure of their victory. But Edward and Ethelfled won't let that happen. They gather their forces, a combined Anglo-Saxon army, and march out to face the Viking threat head-on. The stakes couldn't be higher. If they lose, the Viking grip on England tightens. If they win, they can start to push the invaders back, reclaiming their lands, their future. The battle was bloody, brutal, and unforgiving. Viking shields clashed against Anglo-Saxon swords, and for a moment it's unclear who would emerge victorious. But in the end, Edward and Ethelfled stand tall. The Viking army was shattered, their defeat devastating. Tettenhall is more than just a victory, it's a turning point. The Viking power in Mercia is broken, but Edward and Ethelfled don't stop there. With the Vikings weakened, they seize the opportunity. Now they go on the offensive. Their next goal, reclaiming Anglo-Saxon lands from Danelaw. They push into East Anglia, into Northumbria, building burhs, fortified towns, to secure the lands they take back. These aren't just temporary victories. Edward and Ethelfled make sure their gains are permanent. But the challenges keep coming. In Mercia, Ethelfled faces opposition. Some of the Mercian nobles fear being swallowed by Wessex, preferring their independence. But Ethelfled silences her critics with victory after victory. She holds Mercia together with strength and intelligence, proving she's more than capable of leading her people. And Edward, in turn, strengthens his hold on Wessex, earning the trust of the ealdormen who once doubted him. Yet, despite their progress, there's always one looming question. Can Edward truly live up to his father's legacy? Alfred the Great built the defences that kept Wessex safe, but Edward must take it a step further. He can't just defend, he must expand. He has to push the Vikings back, reclaim lost lands, and unite England under his rule. The weight of that responsibility is crushing. Every decision is a calculated risk. Every battle is a step closer or further from realizing his father's dream. The pressure is relentless. And then there's Northumbria. The Vikings may be weakened, but they still hold firm control of the north. Until Edward and Ethelfled can break the Viking power there, England will never be truly united. The dream remains out of reach. Edward and Ethelfled have already overcome more than most could ever imagine: rebellion, Viking raids, internal dissent. Together, they've proven themselves as the heroes of England's future, forging a path that leads to unity. But their greatest challenge is still to come. Can they push the Vikings out of Northumbria for good? Can they unite England under one crown? In the early 900s, Ethelfled, Lady of Mercia, proved herself a formidable ruler and military leader, gaining control over several Viking-held territories in Northumbria. Her campaigns against the Vikings, notably her seizure of key towns like Derby and Leicester, were crucial in weakening Viking control in the region. Ethelfled was planning to push further north and take York, but fate intervened. In 918, just as her military success was reaching its height, Ethelfled tragically passed away, leaving Edward with the responsibility of continuing their shared vision of a unified Anglo-Saxon England. Her death was not just a personal blow to Edward, who had worked closely with her to defend and expand their territories, but a political one as well. Mercia was left leaderless, and its future uncertain. Edward acted swiftly, knowing that any delay could result in Mercia falling apart or being vulnerable to Viking retaliation. Within months, he moved to take control of Mercia, asserting his authority over the Mercian nobles who had supported his sister. By securing Mercia's loyalty and uniting it with Wessex, Edward made significant progress toward the unification of England. This also marked the first time since the collapse of Roman Britain that a single ruler effectively governed both Wessex and Mercia. However, the greatest challenge remained. Northumbria was still under Viking control. Edward's final campaigns against the Northumbrian Vikings began in earnest by 920, when he launched a series of offensives aimed at breaking Viking power in the north. He capitalized on the divisions within the Danelaw, where Viking leaders were often in conflict with each other and struggling to maintain control over their territories. His approach combined military pressure with diplomacy, forcing Viking leaders to submit one by one. One significant victory in these campaigns came during the Battle of Corbridge, 918. Although primarily fought by Constantine II of Scotland and Ragnall Ua Emer, Edward's support and pressure on Viking territories in the south weakened their position, making the final conquest of Northumbria possible. By 920, Edward's forces moved against the remaining Viking strongholds in Northumbria. His final campaign forced the submission of Viking leaders, including those in York, marking the end of Viking political control in the region. This campaign didn't culminate in a single decisive battle, but rather a series of smaller sieges, skirmishes, and diplomatic agreements that systematically broke Viking power in Northumbria. In the same year, the Welsh kings and the Scots also recognized Edward's overlordship, further solidifying his control over most of England. For the first time, all the major kingdoms, Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria, were united under a single ruler. Edward had successfully realized the dream that his father, Alfred the Great, had fought so hard to achieve. Edward the Elder's ability to unite Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria under one crown marked a monumental achievement in English history. With Ethelfled's death, Edward bore the full weight of responsibility in pushing forward the Anglo-Saxon cause. By 920, England stood on the brink of unification, with the Viking threat significantly diminished. Edward's success laid the groundwork for his son, Athelstan, who would later be the first to officially rule over a united England. As Edward the Elder's reign entered its final years, the vision of a united England was closer than ever before. By 920, Edward had successfully asserted control over Mercia, securing the loyalty of its people after the death of his sister Ethelfled. His influence stretched even further, with the Welsh kings, Scottish rulers, and even the Viking leaders of Northumbria acknowledging Edward's dominance. He had expanded his father's legacy, and for the first time there was a real possibility of uniting all the Anglo-Saxon territories under a single crown. Upon Edward's death, the throne did not immediately pass to his eldest son, Athelstan. Instead, Elfweard, Edward's younger son, briefly ruled over Wessex, though his reign was cut short by his sudden death. This opened the way for Athelstan, who ascended to the throne in 925. Athelstan would go on to realize his father's dream of a united England, building upon the foundations laid by Edward. The elder king's legacy lived on through his son's accomplishments, bringing the vision of a united Anglo-Saxon kingdom closer to reality. It is the year 937 AD. The winds of change are sweeping across the island. The Battle of Brunanburh is coming, a battle that will decide the fate of England. The great armies are gathering. On one side, Athelstan, king of the Anglo-Saxons, and his brother Edmund stand ready to defend the kingdom they have fought to unite. On the other, a mighty alliance of Vikings, Scots, and Irish kings, all intent on breaking the fragile unity that Athelstan has built. The stakes could not be higher. Everything they've worked for is about to be put to the ultimate test. For 5 centuries, the land we now call England was a patchwork of warring kingdoms, the air thick with the clash of swords and the cries of battle. From Lindisfarne to Wessex, the Viking raids, bloody rebellions, and ruthless power struggles tore the island apart. Kingdoms rose and fell, kings were crowned and killed, every ruler clinging to power, every kingdom fighting for survival in a world where only the strongest could hope to endure. The struggles of Alfred the Great, the relentless determination of Edward the Elder, all of them laid the foundations for what was to come. And what was to come was the brutal, bloody, final act, the Battle of Brunanburh. Athelstan's journey to becoming the first king of a united England began long before his military triumphs. Born around 894 AD, he grew up in a world shaped by both family dynamics and powerful mentors. His father, Edward the Elder, was determined to prepare him for leadership, but the family court was fraught with challenges, including the mysterious disappearance of his mother, Ecgwin, who was likely set aside due to political reasons. According to Sarah Foote, in her detailed biography Ethelstan, the First King of England, Ecgwin's disappearance from the court may have been politically motivated, as Edward needed to secure a stronger marriage alliance. Ecgwin's removal from court marked a turning point in Athelstan's early life, leading him to be raised in Mercia by his powerful and influential aunt, Ethelfled, Lady of Mercia. Foote emphasizes the significance of this relocation, noting that Athelstan was effectively raised as a Mercian prince, gaining first-hand knowledge of Mercian politics and governance. Mercia became Athelstan's training ground, where he was shaped by the military strategies and leadership style of Ethelfled, herself a formidable military leader. Frank Stenton, in his classic work Anglo-Saxon England, highlights Ethelfled's pivotal role in the defense of Mercia, stressing her leadership during campaigns against the Vikings. Under her wing, Athelstan learned the complexities of warfare and diplomacy, watching her fortify Mercian towns and navigate alliances, all of which influenced his future reign as king. Beyond his military education, Athelstan was also deeply influenced by his religious and intellectual training. His tutor, Plegmund, the Archbishop of Canterbury, played a critical role in shaping his moral and intellectual outlook. Pauline Stafford, in Unification and Conquest, describes Plegmund's mentorship as foundational, noting that the archbishop's guidance provided Athelstan with a grounding in both Christian theology and the administration of law, key elements of Athelstan's future reign. Athelstan's exposure to the Mercian court and its warriors, combined with his intellectual education, prepared him for the challenges that lay ahead. Sarah Foote and Frank Stenton both argue that Athelstan's upbringing in Mercia gave him a unique perspective on Anglo-Saxon rule, as he was exposed to two great Anglo-Saxon traditions, that of Wessex and Mercia. This duality not only informed his military strategies, but also his approach to diplomacy, particularly in his dealings with the Vikings and other rulers. Athelstan's early years were a crucible where the pressures of family politics, military strategy, and scholarly education forged him into the leader who would one day unite the fractured Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Under the mentorship of Ethelfled and Plegmund, Athelstan became both a warrior king and a scholarly ruler, equipped with the skills and vision necessary to forge a united England. When Edward the Elder died in 924 AD, the question of succession cast a shadow over the realm. Edward had multiple sons, and in Anglo-Saxon England, the line of succession was not always straightforward. Athelstan, despite his status as Edward's eldest son by his first wife Ecgwin, did not immediately ascend to the throne without challenge. According to some sources, Edward's second son, Elfwerd, may have briefly claimed the throne. Certain manuscripts of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle suggest that Elfwerd was recognized as king in Wessex, the heartland of the Anglo-Saxon kings, while Athelstan was favored in Mercia where he had been raised. Frank Stenton in Anglo-Saxon England notes that there was some regional tension between Wessex and Mercia, and this may have played a role in the contested succession. Elfwerd's reign, if it happened at all, was brief. Within a few weeks of Edward's death, Elfwerd himself passed away. This sudden turn of events left Athelstan in a precarious position. He now had to secure his claim to both Wessex and Mercia, and this was no easy task. The Wessex nobility, wary of Athelstan's close ties to Mercia, were hesitant to accept him as king. Pauline Stafford, in Unification and Conquest, highlights how Athelstan's upbringing in Mercia, despite preparing him for leadership, also created distrust among the West Saxon ealdormen, who feared a shift in power away from their traditional stronghold. Athelstan's coronation in 925 was not immediate, and it took time for him to consolidate his power. Sarah Foote, in Ethelstan, the first king of England, notes that Athelstan faced significant opposition from the nobles of Wessex, who may have preferred another son of Edward. However, Athelstan's military experience, his diplomatic acumen, and the support of key Mercian allies eventually allowed him to overcome these obstacles. One significant moment in this power struggle was Athelstan's coronation at Kingston upon Thames, a symbolic location where both Wessex and Mercian kings had been crowned. This ceremony, which cemented his authority, was more than a mere formality. It was a clear declaration of his intent to rule over both Wessex and Mercia, and ultimately all of England. Despite these challenges, Athelstan's rise to power was marked by strategic alliances and key victories that solidified his position as king. He used his Mercian connections and his military prowess to secure the loyalty of the West Saxon ealdormen, and from this point forward he began to build the foundations for a united Anglo-Saxon kingdom. With the crown finally on his head, Athelstan's reign began in earnest in 925 AD, but being crowned was only the first step. Now, Athelstan had to secure his authority over both Wessex and Mercia, unite the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and address the ever-present threat of Viking incursions. Athelstan's first challenge came from within. The nobles of Wessex, who had initially been reluctant to accept him due to his strong ties to Mercia, needed reassurance. Many of these ealdormen had served his father, Edward the Elder, and were wary of Athelstan's connections with Mercia. According to Sarah Foote, in her work Aethelstan, the First King of England, Athelstan had to walk a delicate line between asserting his dominance and maintaining the goodwill of the Wessex nobility. Foote emphasizes that Athelstan used strategic marriages and land grants to secure loyalty among his noble supporters, thus gradually solidifying his power in Wessex. At the same time, Athelstan moved swiftly to strengthen his ties with Mercia. His upbringing in the Mercian court under his aunt, Ethelfled, had already won him the trust of many Mercian leaders, but now, as king, he needed to formalize those alliances. He did this by maintaining strong personal and political ties with key Mercian nobles, particularly those who had fought against the Vikings during his aunt's rule. Frank Stenton in Anglo-Saxon England discusses how Athelstan carefully balanced his dual inheritance from Wessex and Mercia, ensuring that both regions saw him as their legitimate ruler. One of the most significant moves Athelstan made during his early reign was his diplomacy with foreign powers. Athelstan, unlike many of his predecessors, had a far-reaching vision that went beyond the borders of England. He sought to establish alliances with continental rulers, thus securing external support and recognition for his rule. He arranged marriages for his sisters to powerful European leaders, including Otto I of Germany and Charles the Simple of France. These marriages not only brought prestige to Athelstan's court, but also helped to secure political stability at home, as they created a network of alliances that would discourage Viking raids and other external threats. Athelstan's diplomacy was not limited to Europe. He also worked to secure peace with the Welsh kingdoms. In 927, shortly after securing his rule in both Wessex and Mercia, Athelstan summoned Welsh kings to his court at Hereford and forced them to pledge their loyalty to him. According to Foote, this event marked the first time in recorded history that Wales recognised an English king as overlord. By securing the loyalty of the Welsh princes, Athelstan created a buffer zone between his kingdom and potential Viking raids from the west, further strengthening his position. This combination of internal diplomacy with his nobles and external alliances with foreign rulers set the stage for Athelstan's next major challenge, securing his northern borders and dealing with the Viking presence in Northumbria. As Frank Stenton argues, Athelstan's early reign was marked by his ability to balance military force with diplomacy, ensuring that England remained stable while he consolidated his power. The battle for unity, however, was far from over. While Athelstan had secured peace with the Welsh and brought stability to Wessex and Mercia, the Viking-ruled kingdom of Northumbria remained a constant threat. The next chapter of Athelstan's reign would be defined by his campaign to bring Northumbria under his control and complete the dream of a united England. By 927 AD, Athelstan had successfully consolidated his rule over Wessex, Mercia, and the Welsh territories. But his reign would not be truly complete until the kingdom of Northumbria was brought under his control. The northern kingdom, still largely influenced by the Vikings, remained the final piece in Athelstan's dream of a unified England. Athelstan's campaign for Northumbria was not just about territorial conquest. It was about cementing his legacy as the first king to rule over all of England. The Vikings had controlled Northumbria for decades, turning it into a stronghold for their raids and assaults on Anglo-Saxon lands. The region had long resisted Wessex control, and even under Edward the Elder, the Northumbrians remained defiant. But Athelstan, with his powerful army and formidable alliances, was determined to bring them to heel. According to Sarah Foote, in Aethelstan, the first king of England, Athelstan's conquest of Northumbria began with a diplomatic approach. In 927, he managed to secure the surrender of the Viking king of York, Sitric, through negotiation. Athelstan arranged a marriage alliance with Sitric by offering his sister as a bride. This was a strategic move aimed at binding Northumbria to his rule peacefully, but it did not last long. Sitric died soon after, and with his death, any hope for a peaceful unification disappeared. Athelstan, now faced with a more hostile Northumbria, resorted to military force. He marched north where he faced Viking warlords and their allies. The Chronicle of Ethelwerd recounts how Athelstan swiftly took control of York, the Viking capital of Northumbria, and forced the submission of the remaining Viking leaders. This victory marked the first time a single king ruled all of England, including the northern territories that had long been under Viking control. However, Athelstan's success in Northumbria was not merely a result of brute force. Frank Stenton in Anglo-Saxon England emphasizes that Athelstan's genius lay in his diplomacy and ability to forge alliances. After securing Northumbria, Athelstan summoned the kings of Scotland, Wales and Strathclyde to a meeting in Aymont, where they pledged their loyalty to him. By bringing these rulers under his overlordship, Athelstan extended his influence well beyond England's traditional borders, making him one of the most powerful rulers in Western Europe at the time. Despite these successes, the north remained a volatile region. Viking raiders continued to pose a threat, and many of the northern leaders resented Athelstan's dominance. This tension would eventually culminate in the Battle of Brunanburh, where Athelstan faced a grand coalition of Vikings, Scots, and Welsh forces. But for now, Athelstan's campaign in 927 solidified his control over Northumbria, allowing him to claim the title King of all Britain. The conquest of Northumbria marked a turning point in Athelstan's reign. He was no longer just the king of Wessex and Mercia, he was the undisputed ruler of England, the first Anglo-Saxon king to unite all of the kingdom's major regions under one crown. By 937 AD, King Athelstan had successfully unified the kingdoms of Wessex, Mercia and Northumbria, making him the most powerful ruler in England. However, his ambition to create a united and peaceful kingdom was still challenged by external threats. The Viking kings, the Scottish rulers and the kings of Strathclyde had grown increasingly hostile towards Athelstan's dominance. They sought to overthrow him, forming a grand coalition to reclaim their territories and halt his expansionist ambitions. This alliance would set the stage for one of the most decisive and brutal battles in British history, the Battle of Brunanburh. The Battle of Brunanburh was not merely a skirmish, but a monumental confrontation between Athelstan's English forces and a powerful coalition of enemies. The coalition was led by Olaf Guthfrithson, the Viking king of Dublin, who sought to reclaim Northumbria and restore Viking dominance in the north. Constantine II, King of Scotland, who saw Athelstan's growing power as a direct threat to his kingdom. Owain, King of Strathclyde, who feared being subsumed under Athelstan's rule. This coalition represented a formidable alliance of Vikings, Scots and Britons, all determined to end Athelstan's reign and drive his forces from the north. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle vividly describes the size and scope of the invading forces, noting that they sailed across the Irish Sea with a massive fleet ready to meet Athelstan in battle. Sarah Foote emphasizes in Aethelstan, the first king of England, that this was a battle not just for control over Northumbria, but for the very future of England. If Athelstan lost, the dream of a united kingdom would crumble, and the Vikings, Scots, and Britons would regain their independence. The precise location of Brunanburh remains a matter of historical debate, though many scholars suggest it was located somewhere in northern England, likely in the vicinity of modern-day Merseyside or Cheshire. Wherever the battlefield lay, it was large enough to accommodate the massive armies of both sides. Athelstan, aware of the impending invasion, moved quickly to meet his enemies on the battlefield. He assembled a force composed of Anglo-Saxons, Mercian warriors, and men from Wessex, all of whom were fiercely loyal to their king. His army was well-trained and battle-hardened, having faced years of conflict against Viking invaders. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes the Battle of Brunanburh as a bloodbath, the greatest slaughter since the Danes came to Britain. Both sides suffered enormous casualties, with shields clashing, swords striking, and warriors falling by the thousands. The fighting raged from dawn to dusk, with neither side willing to give ground. Athelstan's forces, though outnumbered, were led with precision. Frank Stenton in Anglo-Saxon England suggests that Athelstan's experience in military strategy was a key factor in the battle's outcome. He positioned his men strategically, making the most of the terrain and using his elite Anglo-Saxon warriors to punch through enemy lines at critical moments. The Viking and Scottish forces, despite their overwhelming numbers, were divided in their command. Olaf Guthfrithson and Constantine II struggled to coordinate their armies effectively, allowing Athelstan to exploit weaknesses in their ranks. The Chronicle notes that Athelstan's forces were particularly effective in countering the Viking tactic of shield walls, breaking through with fierce charges that shattered the enemy formations. As the battle wore on, the Anglo-Saxon forces gained the upper hand. Athelstan and his half-brother Edmund fought side by side, leading their men into the heart of the battle. The Chronicle of Ethelweard and other sources describe how the Viking warlords and Scottish kings were ultimately forced into retreat, their armies shattered. The Battle of Brunanburh was a decisive victory for Athelstan. Olaf Guthfrithson fled back to Ireland, and Constantine II was forced to retreat northward, humiliated and defeated. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle commemorates this moment with a grand poem celebrating Athelstan as the ruler of all Britain, praising his triumph as a victory for the English people. The defeat of this grand coalition cemented Athelstan's authority over Northumbria, and for the first time, England stood united under one king. This victory marked the pinnacle of Athelstan's reign, securing his legacy as the first king of a united England. Sarah Foote argues that the Battle of Brunanburh was a watershed moment in the history of Britain. Not only did it establish Athelstan's rule over England, but it also signalled the end of Viking ambitions in the north. The defeat was so severe that the Viking threat in Britain began to decline, leading to a period of relative peace and stability under Athelstan's successors. The Brunanburh poem, recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, captures the emotional weight of the battle and the significance of Athelstan's victory. It portrays the battle as a divinely ordained triumph, with Athelstan and Edmund hailed as the saviors of England, cementing their place in history. After his triumphant victory at the Battle of Brunanburh, Athelstan's reign entered its final phase. Though his grip on power was now secure and his status as the first king of a united England was cemented, the last years of Athelstan's life were not without challenges. His health began to deteriorate, and the pressures of maintaining control over a vast and newly unified kingdom weighed heavily on him. Athelstan spent the next 2 years working to strengthen his kingdom's defences, particularly in the north, where the Viking threat, though diminished, was never fully eradicated. He continued his policy of diplomatic relations with foreign rulers, consolidating alliances with the kings of Scotland, Wales, and even rulers on the continent. These alliances were vital in ensuring that no major rebellion or invasion would disrupt the fragile peace that England now enjoyed. However, Athelstan's reign was not without its dissenters. In 939 AD, just 2 years after his greatest victory, Athelstan died at the age of 45. He passed away at Gloucester, and his body was buried at Malmesbury Abbey, a place he had long favoured, and to which he had made significant donations during his lifetime. His death was a profound moment for the kingdom, as Athelstan left no legitimate children to succeed him. His half-brother, Edmund I, ascended to the throne after him, but the unity Athelstan had forged was now vulnerable. Athelstan's legacy as a statesman, military leader, and unifier of England endured long after his death. He had brought Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, and other regions together under a single crown, creating a vision of England that would inspire future kings and leaders for generations. His policies of legal reform, military strength, and religious patronage helped establish England as a centralized state, laying the foundations for the English monarchy. As historian Frank Stenton emphasizes, Athelstan's reign was the pinnacle of Anglo-Saxon power, but it also marked the beginning of a more tumultuous period in English history. Although he had unified the kingdom, the death of Athelstan left a power vacuum that his successors would struggle to fill. Athelstan's death in 939 AD marked the end of an era, but his achievements laid the groundwork for future generations. The struggle for power among his successors and the ongoing Viking incursions would shape England's trajectory in the years to come. Athelstan's dream of a united England would be tested repeatedly, especially as Viking raids persisted and internal divisions threatened the kingdom. The seeds of political instability planted during the Anglo-Saxon period would eventually culminate in the events leading up to the Battle of Hastings in 1066 AD. This battle, in 1066 AD, which William the Conqueror defeated the Anglo-Saxon king Harold Godwin's son, would mark a pivotal moment in English history as Norman rule replaced centuries of Anglo-Saxon dominance. Athelstan's legacy, however, remained central to the English identity. His efforts to unite the kingdom and his contributions to law, military reform, and diplomacy were foundational to what England would become. The Norman conquest was not merely the end of the Anglo-Saxon era, but the next phase in the evolution of England, an evolution set in motion by Athelstan's reign. In our next video, we will dive into this journey towards Hastings. We will explore the decades of conflict, dynastic struggles, and Viking influences that led to the dramatic showdown in 1066, one of the most iconic battles in English history. How did the legacy of Athelstan and the Anglo-Saxon kings shape this path? What were the critical moments that led to the Norman conquest? Join us as we embark on the journey towards Hastings 1066, the next turning point in England's history. After 500 years of struggle, bloodshed, and endless battles, England has finally emerged. From the early days of fragmented Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to the rise of iconic figures like Alfred the Great, the road to unity was paved with warriors' blood and defined by the threat of invasion, especially from the great heathen army. It was a time of endless resilience, where kings were forged in the fires of battle, and the fate of the land was often decided by the edge of a sword. With the reign of Athelstan, the dream of a united England became a reality. His ability to consolidate Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria under a single crown marked the culmination of centuries of warfare and political maneuvering. Now, after centuries of division, England is born, its people united, its borders secure. The first true king of all England had risen. But the story doesn't end here. England's history is far from over. In fact, the The coming years would present new challenges and new enemies on the horizon as the kingdom moved towards another turning point in 1066 at the Battle of Hastings. On a lighter note, thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring this epic journey through England's tumultuous rise. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the entire History of European Middle Ages channel, where we bring you deeper insights into medieval history with every video. Be sure to like, share and comment to let us know your thoughts. And of course, check out our next videos, where we continue this fascinating story of Europe's Middle Ages journey and beyond. Stay tuned for more, and we'll see you next time.